Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United podcast. I'm your host, as always, Phil Brad, joined with my regular co-host, James Rose. We're on Wednesday today. We're a bit late with this podcast than what we usually are. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, good. Just busy. Kids getting back to getting into school, all that kind of stuff happening this week. So it's been busy.
Oh, I know. It's been busy here too. Obviously, the tour is just over. We have the Community Shield coming up this weekend. Lots of discussion going on at United about various different things. Most of the conversation about recruitment, injuries, the stadium, and
Mm.
a few other things. So, if I could, James, just ask you about the tour, get a quick summary from you on the tour, positive, negative. Seems to be some discussion about the tour and having some correlation with the injuries, which I'm not sure I completely agree with. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that. Overall, I think the tour was what it was for the most part. When you're dealing with an international tournament, it's you get some players there, a lot of players who are not. Most of the players who are there, good fitness, good play. I think there was a lot of positives to take from it, especially in the forward line. Um, One of the things that I thought was very encouraging, Marcus Rashford looked very sharp. Ahmad getting a lot of time in there, even Jadon Sancho coming into the team. These are all things that would be an improvement over last year that we're seeing positives of in preseason. But it's more than that too. In general, the familiarity between the players, the staff, all the new staff in there. It's like a entirely new group of people outside of Ten Hag dealing with all the players and everything. And a lot of the feedback that we got from people on the, and talking to people around the tour was that for the club itself, they felt it was really positive. The
Mm.
players, the squad, the things like that. Obviously, you had these couple of injuries. Results mean next to literally nothing on a preseason tour. You want to see what you're doing, how you're playing, where you're going. I don't think the injuries really have anything to do with the tour either, and how it works when you consider the nature of them. Um, Rasmus Hoyland, I would put the injury far more down to having to play an international tournament than anything to do with the preseason and coming back, and it's his first game back and lack of rest, things like that. So yeah, for me, a positive for me. I think that team that needs to kind of a lot of it is the same people in terms of players. There's a lot of the same players that will be there. A lot of the key players were away. It's just a team that needs to kind of put the past behind it anyway, and so I don't think we're going to get that much out of a to learn out of the tour itself.
I think it reminded me a lot of the tour last season.
Yeah.
With results, and of course the fact that it's overshadowed by injuries.
Hmm.
Ahmad, obviously, Kabi last season were huge losses, bigger than what we realized at the
Yes.
time.
Yes.
And Lenny Euro is a huge, huge loss. I was thinking about that in another way, and I was wondering, trying to take a positive from it, if it might actually help him in a way, because in some sense, it gives him more time to adjust living in England. It gives him more time to adjust to life there, to get a glimpse of the Premier League, watch it from the stands, be able to, somewhat mentally prepare for it. And in some sense, maybe takes a bit of the pressure off him, because if he starts
Mm-hmm.
out first game of the season against City, has a terrible game, the criticism would be, off the charts. We know that by the time he starts playing for United, a lot of the attention around his transfer will have dissipated.
Yeah.
So maybe we might not see Euro until November, somewhere around there. And by that stage, no one will be talking about his transfer fee anymore. No one will be talking about, I think that a lot of the pressure will be taken off him. And hopefully by that stage, United will be playing quite well, and it'll be easier for him to step into the team. Trying to take a positive. Obviously, you would hope he would be. You'd rather he was fit, but in
Yeah.
another sense, this bit of a layoff might actually help him adjust. As soon as he came, he was straight on a plane. He was up to Glasgow, then up to then up to America, of course. And if you think about being 18, James, and moving to another country, it's massive. Everything's a first.
Yes.
I mean, I remember when I first came to America, the culture shock and everything was just enormous.
Mm.
Just getting used to a different way of life, different culture, different attitudes to things. And it takes you about a year to adapt to that before you get comfortable and understand. And usually the first year you get a bit of homesick because you're completely changing everything, and so in some sense, I think it might actually help him. Of course, the other injuries, and I understand we all want to look for some causal elements
Yeah.
because it's completely, you look at other clubs. No, clubs, I mean, everyone has injuries, but it just seems like United are just cursed.
It does
But
sometimes feel that way, doesn't it?
if it was American, if it was a tour, then all clubs would be getting the same injuries, would they not?
Yep.
Because
Yeah, we
you know,
played the other big clubs, Arsenal, City,
yeah,
Liverpool.
yeah. Well, if
They
why
all
aren't they
played in
getting those
America.
injuries? If they're playing on
Yeah.
the same fields, they're in the same country. Why isn't it happening to them?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what you can do as a manager to avoid impact injuries. I've heard people say, why were they playing in preseason? For obvious reason, they have to play.
What else are they
I
gonna do?
mean,
Yeah.
they have to get ready for the season. So it's just it was really demoralizing before the Liverpool game. Looking at all the injuries, and sometimes you can be a bit cynical when you're in the moment. And I was tweeting that no doubt we'll get injured players against Liverpool. Sure enough, that's what happened. Beyond that, there was some concerning aspects of that Liverpool performance, good performance, but again, United not scoring goals, no real threat down the middle. I know, obviously, they didn't have a striker on tour. Will they play with a false nine against City the way they played in the cup final, which very well may happen. But nonetheless, the fact that United were a bit toothless in that game is quite concerning.
Yeah, I mean it's always a balance with United of thinking when you're talking about goal scoring, they created chances, but there was no finishing edge. I mean, Mason Mount probably should have scored. And the funny thing, he's a player who has historically scored a lot of goals. It was a good save by the keeper, to be fair. There was a fair number of moments. McTominay missed one he probably should have scored. They probably should have finished those chances. And you can have different views on this. For my money, I'd rather the problem of creating chances and not finishing them than not creating chances and finishing 1 out of 1. You know what I mean? Like having 1 chance per game and finishing it. So it's a little bit of both. I think it comes with a balance, a little bit of rust to lack of sharpness, and sometimes, of course, there's just that little edge that you don't have in preseason. Now, Liverpool didn't seem to have that issue with finding that edge and scoring their chances, and some of the other teams didn't either. But I don't know. I would less worry about that aspect. Specifically the finishing. I mean, comes in waves. They get hot and cold.
I think what would have, in my opinion, someone like Ethan Wheatley showed for me he's not ready yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. There are things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, like young kid that has potential but needs to be loaned out. In my opinion, that jump seems a bit big for him right now. Maybe that he can make that jump, but everyone makes it at different times. Harry Amos, to me, talented kid, but still needs experience. Needs to play for me at an intermediate level, maybe the championship level for a year. There's a couple of times where he was getting caught out by runners in behind. You saw it in the Arsenal game with Jesus, although he might have been offside. I think it happened in the Betis game too, if I remember correctly. Very talented kid on the ball, very impressive, certainly a lot of potential, but his defending worries me just slightly, where it's like, okay, it just needs a bit more experience. But this is something that I've criticized Wan-Bissaka for, about not having awareness behind you, what comes in behind you, and it's something that's repeatedly been an issue for him, in my opinion. But I think with young Amos too, he would need, in my opinion, a year out on loan somewhere.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? Because if Malacia was healthy, you wouldn't even consider keeping him. You would say for sure the best thing for his development is to go out for a year and play. Because I think there's a player in there going forward. You can see it through some of the things he does that, like Luke Shaw does, carrying the ball, the interplays with the winger, which were important. I thought that was actually, a positive overall when you saw him. The interplay with Rashford was kind of crucial to a lot of the best moments we did see in the preseason and getting forward. But then when the ball would get the other direction, he was a little lost at times and definitely a little behind, the run of play, the types of players who are there. And when you face it in the regular season, it's only going to get worse. In an ideal world, he goes out a year, gets physically a bit more ready, gets a bit faster, somewhere like Ahmad went, something in the championship, even just physical, play a lot of football
Yeah.
and be physical and develop that aspect of the game and just a constant, running into players that happens at that level of play. And that would help. At the same time, it kind of depends on your signings a little bit, because he probably could do a job in a Europa League game here or there. You could probably do a job in a cup game here or there to last you a few months if Tyrone Malacia is actually making it back on the pitch, but I'll believe that when I see it. And then get you to January where you could get a loan if you need it, in an emergency, and maybe send him out on loan. Not the ideal situation, but it's kind of like, we definitely don't want to be short. But what do you think? I mean, would you rather we end up playing Victor Lindelof at left back because of an
No,
injury, or have Harry Amas,
I think you need a natural left footer. I think
Yeah.
one thing with Amas is he's 17. So
Yeah.
if he stayed a year and wasn't playing every single week for the first team, but was playing sporadically, playing for the Europa League, playing some first team games, also playing, under 23 football, it wouldn't be terminal for his career. Now, not Toby Collier's situation where Toby Collier's 20.
Yes.
This is the age now where you really have to start playing regular football for development. There's a lot of kids at 17 that are nowhere near a first team that will develop into, excellent first team players. So, I could see both sides of the argument where they say, okay, stay here for a year, you'll play some games, you'll play and you'll learn and develop. And then maybe then you're a better situated, better player to go out on loan to a top end championship team, or maybe even, a lower, bottom 6 Premier League team.
Yep.
Than where you're at right now, because there's still development there, and that needs to happen, as you would expect. He's just a young kid, but I like his body language. He looks like a confident young player to me. I like that.
Yes.
He's got the socks rolled down. He's someone that wants the ball. He's comfortable on the ball. And was it a Mad's goal? I think he set up.
It was a cross.
Yeah, and United badly need players that are naturally left-footed, that can get to a byline and pull a ball back. I think that is vital for a striker. I think that's vital for wingers. And so I wouldn't be against keeping him. And I would agree that if you don't have enormous confidence in Tyrone Malacia to be able to play every week, you have to keep him. I don't think, considering where United are at financially right now, they have the ability to go out and bring a left back in. We'll get to that obviously in a minute. One of the positives, I think, from the tour was, of course, Ahmad. Very, very, very excited, actually, to see him this season. I'm glad United didn't sell him. I know we talked a little bit about this last week, but someone that really looks like he is at that level that you need. And I think he's ready to really push on this season.
I think so too. I mean, you can see it. He's sharp and he's a small player, but he's obviously learned to use his body in a way that you've seen other players of his size do well. He reminds me, in certain ways, in not quite like Messi, but in fact, someone like Eden Hazard who was able to use his body really well to control himself and has surprising amount of speed, things like that too. And he just looks there, like he looks like he fits in the men's game for sure at this point, and he's ready. His abilities on the ball, his ball striking, these things are all top tier. The talent is absolutely there. He needs to play a lot, and I mean, it's just preseason, but when we compare it to some of what we've seen on the right, not to beat up on another player who had a very auspicious tour on that right wing. I mean, significantly better than what we've seen out of any left-footed right winger in a long time for United there, and in terms of what he can do. And I think he's going to be huge there this year. I think it's going to be hugely important having him, in that team and offering his abilities for the club.
One thing that concerns me about Ahmad, and this might just be based on past experiences, is every single game I feel like he's on the verge of getting injured. No, where I see him land down and hold him on the arm, like, oh Christ, no. And I feel like, because of the curse of football club, is he capable of staying fit every week? I really hope he is. He gets a break, but players like that get targeted because they're skillful. And they get, players can be naughty. They put stamps in. They make sure that off the ball. They sort of happened with Rashford, against Battis. Players, but with players like that, they get targeted. But every week I just feel like every game I just feel like he's on the verge of getting injured, and I don't remember Garnacho going like that. I hope. Please, I'm not saying anything negative about Ahmad. I just feel like I'm traumatized by his previous injuries, and I really pray he stays fit, because there's a young kid that has immense talent. Of course, some of the other question marks are about Jadon Sancho, and I don't want to pick on Jadon Sancho at all, James, but it doesn't look like a player to me trying to save his United career. And there was an individual, won't name them, from United that was not exactly overly complimentary about Sancho's, I'm going to say effort, but wasn't glowing about, saying we need more from him.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a challenge depending on expectations too for Jadon Sancho at this point, right? Because as compared to what he was purchased for and where he was at as a younger player, he's got huge. It's almost going to be impossible for him to get back up to that point. It's been years, away from that. I think the reality is that for everybody, and it's hard because it's not requisite to his wages, to the fee, to all of those things, but if you push all of that aside and you did kind of turn over a new leaf and say, here's a young player coming in after having not a great time the last few years of his career, and he's still young, and obviously all of that's trying to get back in there and judge him based on that. I think it would be a little bit easier to look at him as an option there and say, this is a player who's maybe fighting to resume his career as a footballer, because frankly, that looked a bit in doubt. Not to say he wouldn't have a team somewhere, but resume his career, get back into a position of being able to play at a top club. And I think the position that he should be aiming to lock down is like as a backup left winger, and that's a far cry from where he was before. But if from that perspective, obviously it's challenging because it's not like it's all, roses and beautiful between him and Ten Hag and between him and the club and the history of everything that's gone on. But you've got people there who do really like him now. And it was part of the reasons that they've been able to move forward. And I'm of the perspective of, if they've put it behind them, then, and we have all of these things that have gone wrong from United so much. In some ways, I see Sancho as a little bit of like the poster boy for so much that has been wrong, because it turned into such a disaster when you think about the signing and where it went and how it ended up. A player that when he was in the Bundesliga, I know it's a different league. There are so few players in the history of the sport who have done the kind of numbers that he did at that point in time in his career, ever, not just at his age. And there's something that really has gone wrong, and it's not like it's not his responsibility to sort these things out, but it's almost like if the club could make it work with Jadon Sancho and over the course of the season get something good out of him and make him into a player, it would give me a lot of confidence that they can, because you kind of need to do that. I don't know really how to put it, but you kind of need to be able to fix these problems, in order to be a top club, I think, at the end of the day. I think
so.
It's
Here's my take on Sancho.
Yep.
Undoubtedly he has talent, right?
Yeah.
But he's in a weird position where, first of all, he doesn't want to be a second string player, doesn't want to be a backup to anyone, right? So, secondly, he looks like a player to me that, yes, United, Ten Hag, the football club drew a line under it, but there's another question: is do you believe you're going to play in this football team?
Mm-hmm.
And I look like I see a Jadon Sancho that doesn't believe that he has the trust of his manager when it comes to playing football. And that's a whole different thing, right? So, yes, we drew a line. Yes, you can be in training. Yes, there's no more issue between us. But then there's the other thing. Do you trust me as a footballer? Will I play in this football team? And I don't think he believes he will. I think that he believes that Ten Hag has already decided that he will not start in this football team. So when I say that he's not, doesn't look like a player that's trying to save his career, I think that he doesn't believe that he will convince his manager that he should be starting once, Garnacho's there, Rashford's there, Fernandez is there, Mason. I don't think he believes he will be in that team. And I'm not sure he believes he can convince his manager to be in that team. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I'm still not sure where he plays. But then I have a similar question to Mason Mount that I still don't understand where and how he plays, because Mount's a good player. He needs a number 9 to play off, no doubt.
Yeah.
But his end product is a bit, the goals aren't there. We're not seeing, the creativity where you still have wingers, but it's just a bit puzzling to me. It still seems like a bit of, I can't square the circle. I don't know what the thinking was, why you would go for a player like that, considering what United's needs are. Ten Hag still has to deal with the tactical issue of not being too open in midfield. And, there's still major question marks about the midfield and whether it's equipped to deal with the Premier League, whether, we've addressed the issues from last season. If you go back to last season's cup final, James, right? We talked about this last week on the podcast. Amrabat was a big part of the reason why United had much more balanced midfield, because it actually goes back to, I think it might have been the Arsenal game after the Palace game. I know Casemiro played centre back in that game and they conceded a back goal, but there looked to be a different balance in midfield. United all of a sudden weren't conceding 25 shots a game. And we're going to go back to not having an Amrabat in midfield. To not having really anyone that can play that position. The squad, what it was last season, is smaller in numbers. Will Xerxes play? I don't know. I understand United are obviously hamstrung by PSR and what have you. I get that, but I'm not certain. With that midfield, is it good enough right now for what United want to do next season?
I'm not sure either, and it's the biggest concern. I was saying I was very surprised, when there was another bid made for another center back before we've bought a midfielder, and I was very surprised that it's been almost like viewed as a lower priority. I'm not sure by who or why or what. If it's a matter of they're just not convinced or certain of who to bring in, that maybe the player, this kind of, Yoro was obviously an unmissable opportunity that they saw. Xerxes, with the release clause, with the talent, with the profile, was to them almost an unmissable opportunity. They don't maybe see that in the midfield among the players available at a way they can afford. But then it's so bad, like it was really hard because it was the biggest problem last year. And it's like, it's hard to debate it because, your center backs, have we improved? Even with Lenny Yoro, is it going to improve our play? Probably not over last year. Getting a new center back and Lisandro Martinez being healthy, yes, but
Yes.
because you don't stop shots from the center back position. Those are there to prevent in a way you can higher up the pitch, but it's the threat running towards the center back that seemed to be the problem constantly last season, that it was just so open and they're just attacking your back line immediately and the midfield was empty. And we see it still through the preseason, the same problem. The midfield is empty. They run through it like it's nothing. Kobe Mainu isn't going to fix that. He's not that combative player, and he struggled when he was asked to have to do that too much because that's not where his strengths are as a world-class potential player. And it is odd to me. It really is odd to me that they've kind of it's been on the back burner, it feels like, and that it hasn't been addressed so much earlier. And I know part of the challenge was this thinking Casemiro that someone was going to come for him, that Saudi was going to buy him because there's a lot of money tied up there. They haven't been able to move anybody in this position. They still have McTominay, still have Casemiro, still have all of that, but you still have to be able to sign somebody there to make a difference. It's such a big deal.
Yeah, it's obviously United want to do business. Obviously, they want to bring players in. This is not like previous summers where it's been a complete chaotic mess with no strategy going after players. We know that the reason why they haven't signed more players is simply because they're trying hard to sell players.
Yeah.
It's a bit frustrating when you see Emil Smith Rowe go for 30-something million. You see Conor Gallagher go, and it's like, United can't sell McTominay. Still struggling to sell Wan-Bissaka. I don't know what, a week ago they were telling us they were close to selling Wan-Bissaka and Lindelof. Will that still happen? I don't know.
Why is it stuck?
Why are we still having this discussion? And then we look at some of the players that are being linked with coming in. Wan-Bissaka to possibly to Inter Milan. Wan-Bissaka would be open to that, bizarrely enough, even though it was something that he wanted to go to. And I don't have any specific knowledge on that. I think it was Andy Mitten was saying that on his Talk of the Devils podcast last week. I was listening to, or it might have been Laurie, one of the guys on there. But of course, we're looking at Denzel Dumfries. And I mean, far be it for me to judge anything, but
we're gonna anyway.
I've got to be honest. Like I'm sitting here going, what are we gonna do? Saint King Billy of Orange? I mean, it's like
we don't always agree.
To look at anyone that hasn't played in Holland or isn't Dutch. I understand that we like to work with people from our ex-club. Mourinho came to Chelsea, he brought Carvalho, he brought, Fonseca, he brought Deco, I get that, right? But this is bordering on a bit ridiculous to me.
Isn't it? It is a little bit. It's like there's got to be a backup right back somewhere else. And the other option is Mazraoui, right? Which is probably more likely who will get. He also played for Ajax. So it's like, and I actually like Mazraoui a lot more than Denzel Dumfries, right? But I'd be fine with Mazraoui. It's a backup fullback position, but it's like, where's the other name? There's got to be somebody.
But what would be funny to me is imagine you're in these recruitment meetings, right? And they go, all right, we need a midfielder. Any suggestions? All right. At some point, I'll be like, I don't have the balls to mention another Dutch player or
Edson Alvarez again, right? Another player who's played for you.
Nelson the mixer. I'll go, some random player in Argentina or something. I'm like, I've got some
just
balls.
Pull a name up.
Another Dutch player.
I know it is funny because it's like that somehow we have to be able to look at somebody else. And but we might get something there, but it's like we know they want to do business, as you said. We both had discussions with people about that. They want to do business, and it's always been about selling to buy and moving these players on. And we know that like as you put it on Twitter the other day, which is very much correct. They're willing sellers this year. They're not sitting here trying to preserve value and shit like that we've heard in the past. That is utter nonsense, right? They want to sell, but it's not that easy. McTominay, I understand it from the outset. It looks like, all right, well, Fulham need to pay some more money, and they should too, to be fair. He's scored more goals than Smith Rowe and all that as well. At the same time, part of the problem there is I don't think McTominay wants to go to Fulham. I'm not sure he's that encouraged by it, and that can put clubs off too. And when you look at it, why would he? Fulham's never going to play in the Champions League. He's been playing at United his whole career. He makes good money. I understand there's the aspect of ambition of being a bench player versus starter, things like that. But players nearing the end of their career, nearing the end of their contracts, rather, they could walk and sign for somebody else for free in a year, and that makes it tricky as a club to get rid of them at that point.
I'm not saying this is correct, but if you're McTominay, last summer United tried to sell him. Mm-hmm. And he ends up having probably his most important season for the football club after not going. Mm-hmm. So in his head, is he seeing, you're not going to play, you're going to be put, and you end up becoming, a really, really important
Maguire player too, right? And he's not going anywhere this summer. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so, I mean, I think obviously United want to sell him because they need to be able to sell him to bring in other players. But to me, I'm looking at this saying, okay, United need to sell to buy. Most likely, they'll eventually get Wan-Bissaka out the door. I think that's a solution that suits everybody. Okay, so you bring in Mazraoui. But to me, it's not obvious where your next sale comes from.
Yes, it's not, is it?
So, I mean, I'm not confident United will sell Sancho.
No, me neither.
Maybe they get Lindelof out, but I don't know if Lindelof getting out is enough to get you Ligt. And if it isn't, does it make sense to sell him?
Yeah.
I'm looking at this going, you can't sell Casemiro. Even if you manage to sell Christian Eriksen, you're getting pennies.
You're getting nothing because he's on a year left in his age. It's like, yeah.
So you're looking at this going, it's not obvious to me, where that next player still comes from.
Yeah, it's not at all. And then there's the other side of the coin here, and it's a balancing act between United, right? Because we've seen with like the midfield, for example, there's actually a number of players in this position, and we haven't seen it that often. They walked away. They kind of walked away, and they didn't say we're not going to sign this player. We don't like him anymore from Braithwaite because they said, look, we don't value him as high as that question is, and we're just not going to pay it. Where in years past we would. We often just ended up paying and very often regretted it, right? The same thing with Ugarte, right, is the story this week that, they're just not going to value him at 60 million euros and then not pay it. And they're not going to pay that. The Ligt, part of the problem even there is they're not going to pay Bayern's asking price for it if it doesn't shift, if it doesn't adjust. They're not going to pay more than what they value players for. And so you have needing to sell to raise funds, but then this thing where it is such a hard balance, right, to discuss because it's hard to know the right answer. But it is probably good in the long term to walk away from these things and to say, we're not going to pay the 15 million extra just because. Who else are you going to sell them to?
Yeah.
But that might leave you a short or struggling a little to, no, it's fine. This might leave you a little short or struggling to find options, especially I think in part because they haven't been here that long. Dan Ashworth, getting in right in the middle of summer and all of that. It's like they didn't have probably as robust this price option, then this price, then this, then this, and this, all the way down like you would hope for in future summers. And I know that they don't want to make mistakes. So it's a fine line, though, walking away versus leaving yourself too weak for the season, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a fine line. And I think one of the things that's making Ineos just a bit more careful is how difficult it is to untangle themselves from the financial mistakes that have been made from the past
Yes.
with players.
Yeah.
Casemiro stands out for them, as a player that, they've got on a long-term contract on massive wages. It's very difficult to move on if they don't work out. So I think part of what they're doing with these deals is that there's an escape option if they don't work out.
Yeah.
So, it's easy to walk in, pay enormous amounts of money to these players. I'm certain that they'll work, but not all of them will. And so with the likes of Ligt and what have you, there's a couple of realities we face here, James. And I said this on Twitter the other day, last week. I was a bit misunderstood, but I was talking about, Bayern want to pay 25 million for Tal, right? But it's not about whether, their contractual situation with the players and what have you. It's about whether you think Jonathan Tah's a better player than Matthijs de Ligt. That's it.
Yeah.
If you don't think he's a better player than Jonathan or Matthijs de Ligt, then you don't go for him. You keep what you have.
Yeah.
And the length of the contract is only relevant if you don't want to sell the player. If you go for a player that you don't want to sell, that contract offers you protection. But if you want to sell the player, the fact that you're on a 4-year contract has nothing to do with the valuation. Nothing.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's your problem. If I want to sell something and I've got a 4-year commitment to that, and if anything, that should lower the price.
Yep.
Okay, because I'm getting you out of a 4-year commitment to on massive wages that you don't want. That has to have value in the price. Okay, so I want to incentivize you even further to take this commitment off me because so that is a factor in cost. So to me, it's like why do Bayern want to move Matthijs de Ligt on at his age, and bring in a player at half the price, regardless of Tah's contract situation? Because the only question that matters in that discussion is, do you think he's a better player or not? And if Bayern think Tah's a better player than de Ligt, that would concern me. But regardless, if Ten Hag wants him, then United, football department thinks he's the right move, Bayern will drop that price because there's nobody else coming knocking on the door from Matthijs de Ligt. He's already done Italy with Juventus, so no one in Italy's coming for him. No one in Spain's coming for him. Okay, so unless another English club comes in for him, and I'm not sure they will. I don't see what else they can do. PSG is a similar situation with Ugarte. They just bought Neves, and the question is that you only keep Ugarte if he's going to play regularly. But he played 25 Ligue 1 games last season.
Yeah.
His value is not going to increase if he has another 25 Ligue 1 games next season. So the question for PSG, I believe they'll bring that price down too if they want to move him on. And for United, it's better to wait 2 weeks and get him in the last 2 weeks of the window than it is to move for him right now and get him at a much higher price. Okay, get him in a week or two earlier, so what? So I do think
explore their alternatives in the short term. Yeah.
And they're right to do this.
Yep.
There was a loose tentative inquiry for De Jong, just because Barcelona want to move him on, and massive wages, same problem. Also,
injury problems
he's injured.
too. Yeah,
I believe he's injured. Yeah. So other question marks is Fofana. These are all players on their list, and then of course the one that provoked. I mean, I do my best to stay off social media because I can't deal with what I see on my timeline every day. It just depresses me. So I miss a lot of what gets said, but I go on random times a day, but instead of staying on there for hours and doom scrolling, I put the phone down and go do something else. But Sander Berge, of course, which has provoked, from what I understand, some negative reaction. Now, Berge, of course, I think Burnley would be interested in selling him. Before he went to Sheffield United, he was a player at very high demand. I don't watch much football anymore. I don't play Football Manager anymore, so I don't know much about these players. But those are those are players are under consideration. I still think United will bring in a defensive midfielder.
Yeah, I think they'll get something done, and I think that's why they're looking at, some of these players in better cost brackets too. Because if you can't get a sale done, the reality is you do have to look at someone like, in the 20 to 30 million range in order to afford it. They're just going to have to, and it's not the worst plan in the world, right? Compared to how we've operated in the past, to buy a cheaper player that we like, that next year can be the backup, and next year we make the bigger purchase on someone we're more convinced on. That's not the worst plan. Buy him now and then push him down a little bit in the future by the next player, and so they're looking at that because a lot of the names we're talking about, Fofana, Berge. There's another one I think that Duncan Castles had mentioned that it has some legitimacy. Veerman. It plays in the Dutch league as well, but he did not play for Ten Hag. But he's a really good player, and it makes more sense. You could get these players in for 20 to 30 million, and that leaves you flexible next season to say, Ericsson's gone on a free. Scott McTominay could go on a free. Casemiro has a year left, to say, yeah, now we'll spend big in the midfield because we've addressed these other areas and have this person as a rotation. And I think that's how you could look at some of these names. They're not necessarily the star that they're bringing in to be the long-term player, but we need midfield reinforcement, and they're good players, and they're still in good age brackets where they could still improve. Good price points. Sander Berge is a good player. He's a good player still. He is. He's got some good traits. I wouldn't say he's like this outstanding, incredible player. He's got a good long pass. He's defensively disciplined and can cover ground. And he's very good holding, carrying the ball. And I think he would help a lot. I think he would help the team a lot. And that's okay. I think in this is the kind of finding that balance, of like, don't go waste money on an expensive player that you're not convinced on. Get a young player who's good, that has some potential, that you're not going to lose on a 20, 25 million pound player who's on 50 grand a week. You're not going to hamstring yourself for the financial future if after a couple years you've got to move them on. It's not a disaster like it's been in the past.
Well, I mean, even that position, James, that's like a striker position that's changed so much, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so it's really, really hard to find ball winning midfielders,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, Liverpool, they had Fabinho in there, but they were, they had Thiago in there. They're trying to put Trent
They still
Alexander-Arnold in
haven't
there.
fixed it. Yeah. Yeah.
City were putting John Stones in there. They tried to bring in Calvin Phillips. It didn't work. Arsenal were playing Jorginho in there. It's not an easy position. Obviously they got Declan Rice, which is similar to Kobe Mainu, but you're not finding those defensive ball winning midfielders anymore that are all over the place. There's no Makalele's knocking about. They're very, very hard to get. So
Yep.
the game is changing, and what the type of player that plays alongside, a ball winning or ball playing midfielder. So it's you're not spoiled for choices. And look, the players that we're talking about that are 25, 30 million right now, a year ago would be 50, 60 million before PSR didn't bite, right?
Yep. Yep.
So it's easy because we're so conditioned to high fees to think 25, 30 million's bargain basement, but it's actually a reappraisal value based on the
Yep.
market. Same with Fofana and everything else. That these are players that in the past were going for double this, but there's just not the market out there for it anymore.
Yep.
So it's really difficult to if to put that type of price valuation and correlate it with their ability. So I don't know. I'm not, I wouldn't be devastated if United signed Sander Berge. I'm sure there's people on this listening to this right now want to put a hammer in my head. I understand that. I disagree, but for me, it's like I'm okay with some practical signings too. United
Yep.
badly need a defensive midfielder. They badly need another midfielder in there. But even the fact that they were looking at a Ugarte, how many other midfielders are there out there that can do that will give you that? I mean, there's just they're hard to find. I mean, see Atletico, what they paid for Conor Gallagher. They were trying to sign Matt O'Reilly. They're not that easy to find. And yeah, there's a Zubi, Zubimendi at
Zubimendi, yeah.
51 million and stuff like that there.
But he's
You
also
know,
not what people think. He's not like this heavily combative midfielder that's going to run around winning the ball.
well,
He's another ball playing midfielder.
the other thing is, James, and we saw this with Casemiro, adjusting from La Liga to the Premier League in that position, okay, is not easy
Yeah.
because the pace is totally different. The
Yep.
time on the ball is totally different. And the way Spanish teams play, the way English teams play is totally different.
Yep.
So, I'm not, these are obviously very good players. And of course, Rodri is an exception to this.
Yeah.
But it's not an easy transition. So, by no means is it guaranteed. So I don't know. There's just not many outstanding options out there available in that position anymore. Look, as you were saying at the start of this podcast, the mood at United is definitely a lot more positive. There's definitely a lot more discussion and relationship between the owners of the football club, the board, the manager, a lot more alignment, and you're certainly much more entwined than any previous
Yes.
Manchester United tour that I've seen. So there's 100% commitment from the people at the football club to make it better. They know some of the problems that exist. They see the same thing you see, but
Yep.
fixing it is not as easy as it appears because they need to sell, and selling is a very difficult thing to do in this current market. But I still think, by the end of the window, we'll have 2 more signings in.
I think so too. I think we'll get there. I think the strategy is okay right now, and it's like we said, it is a fine balance, but they have an appetite to do more business and get more signings done, and they're obviously looking within the framework of if they cannot get any major sales, will happen. I do think the Wan-Bissaka thing will happen, and Mazraoui will come in and he can cover left back too, and I think that makes a big difference in terms of not having this disaster that we've had last year in the case of an injury to Luke Shaw or something like that. And then I'm sure they recognize the problems. I mean, that they've shown that these are smart people. I think that their approach has been careful but intelligent, because we've seen things where we've been so enthusiastic, even under the Glazers, about, wow, we've gone and we've spent all this and we've done all of this, and it's gone absolutely to shit very, very quickly. And it's certainly more measured. It's certainly more careful. But I think they've been very clear that that's what they're going to do to start, and that it's going to take that time. And they followed through on a lot of the things they said they're going to do behind the scenes, right? In the overhauls and the staffing and the medical and the Carrington, and they're moving on the stadium. They're doing the right things there. And so, I do think that we will get more business done for sure, but smart business, is really what matters.
Yeah, look, there's obviously we want to see that get strengthened between the now and the end of the window, and I think, like we said, that they will.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that they've been doing that deserves a lot of credit is quietly in the background they've been recruiting heavily for the academy, and we'll
Yep.
see the dividend of that very, very soon. You see
Yep.
United now sending young players from academies get up that they were never getting before. I mean, there's no way United are getting a Chidi Martin a year
Yeah.
ago. No way.
True.
And such as football today, James, it used to be unheard of, to see, it was an anomaly to see a 16, 17-year-old playing professional football. But that's now not as uncommon because of the way young players are nutrition, because of sports science, because obviously the mental side is still something that has to be very seriously considered. But it wouldn't surprise me, and maybe I'm being unfair here and putting too much pressure on this kid, to see Obi Martin a couple of appearances next season off the bench, maybe in a Carabao Cup game, maybe in the Europa League if United are comfortable and already qualified. I'm not even sure the format anymore, but it's a league format. No idea how it works. but but
Confusing a little
it
bit for
wouldn't
sure.
surprise me to see that and United are the football club that's going to make that happen. One of the reasons why, of course, that he identified for coming to Old Trafford was a pathway into the first team. So it wouldn't surprise me to see that happen. And of course, there's been other active recruitment across the youth team, which is very, very important. So I think that that is something that who thought when United signed Garnacho for 100,000 that he'd end up being the way he is. At 17, he was
Yeah.
already playing his first team. So these are also recruitment signings that don't make headlines but are very, very
Yep.
important.
No doubt about that. And you're right. And these are things that'll come down the road. And even to be fair, it started earlier because there's a lot of really good academy prospects that just need a little more time. And it does have to be considered in some instances. If you start investing in there, not only have they done pretty well moving them on, like with Kambuala, Alvaro Fernandez, where they've actually gained profit on these players, but they have these buybacks and these sell-ons, that is something we can start doing for the future. That's going to help a lot with the finances later. But having a spot for some of these players to come through and to play and to have minutes, like we've seen with Amos, is like if you go sign, because I think there is a player in there, but if you go sign a left back now, like
Yeah.
another top left back for a lot of money, he's done at United. It's over. You've got to sell him. That's pretty much it. And that might not be the best decision to make, and so there's that's another area where there's a balance. But I think we'll see the dividends of investing in those areas and focusing on a youth in the future, especially in the new PSR kind of world, because it really heavily incentivizes, I guess, naturally by the way that it's set up, effective use of your academy and having these young players in and investing in that way. Um, and obviously, we don't really want United to ever become like Chelsea, where they want to get rid of an academy player and they force him out of the team just because, and all of that. United has always been better about that in the way that they treat people, to be fair. But at the same time, being able to actually have benefits from your academy is a big deal.
Yeah.
And I think it matters.
Does definitely matter to me. All right, let's take a quick look ahead to City game this weekend.
Yes.
Not sure what lineup to expect. Obviously, the result in terms of the winning the winning the Community Shield is not major trophy and all that, but I still feel that for Ten Hag, this is an important result because
Yeah.
if they go into this game and they are beaten comfortably, all the old demons from last season are going to surface, and all that optimism that was, that people had from preseason, will start to dissipate. And one of the things I suppose that worries me just a tad, if I don't mean to be negative here, but is what it would do to team morale if they get beaten. Because I do believe that players, given what's gone before, their recovery is delicate. And
Sure.
I think this is an important result for United in terms of starting on the right foot, convincing the players and everyone else around them that they're at this level, that they can compete with the top teams. This is really, really important.
Yep.
And I think that I think it'll be a close game. I think it'll be a lot like the cup final.
Yeah.
And I've said before, City can be slow starters sometimes where they don't get
Yep.
into their groove, and around about October, November, then they start to see that momentum. But I also think there's a lot of question marks surrounding City this season, over Guardiola's future. You
Yep.
saw what that did to Klopp at Liverpool last season. I do
Yep.
believe it will be Guardiola's last season. And they've just sold Alvarez. They're so not sure what I'm sure they'll obviously be exceptional for most of the season, but maybe not
Yep.
the City we've seen before. I still have a maybe incorrect or not, but I still have a decent sense of optimism this weekend.
Yeah, I know, and it's kind of funny because I also do. I feel like we could be better. I mean, last season was such a pall on things, and the injuries were a huge part of that. When you look at it, I kind of looked at the team, and I know that people will get angry when you start to be this a little bit optimistic on this side of things because they want more signings and people coming in. And so do I, to be fair. But I looked at it and I thought, when you kind of factor it all in, you've added, Ahmad, Xerxes, and Sancho to the front line this year. You've only made one transfer, but you've actually added all three, who none of them really had much of an impact last year. Ahmad did in the very brief time he got to play. And now you've got him for the whole season. He was also injured for half the year, right? So you've got three additions to the front line of young, talented players. And obviously Sancho with a big question mark still, but there's something there we didn't have, at least, to add to it. In the back line, we forget Lissandro missed nearly the entire season, right? And you've added that as a huge, huge plus. Luke Shaw missed the entire season. And I'm not saying we can necessarily rely that he won't get injured again, but as of right now, we'll have Luke Shaw to start the season. We did not have him, last year pretty much at all for the whole season. Those are a lot of additions. Those are a lot of additions to a team that needs them. Mason Mount basically didn't play last year either, and we still have questions where is he going to fit. But that's still a player who has won a Champions League and was a huge part of that and has succeeded in the Premier League. There's a good player. We have to figure out how to use him, but he is a good footballer that we have added to the team that we really didn't get to see. So it's not making excuses for not making more signings because we need them, but the addition that we'll start the season with, and ideally not lose all of them within the first month like last time, is going to be greater, far greater than just the two players we've signed already. And I strongly think we've talked about this for such a long time when it comes to the ownership, the Glazers, the investment, the things that go on behind the scenes, that all of that will have a bigger impact by far. Because I think we could sign everyone and it wouldn't work out with how things have been happening in the past,
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the case anymore. And I just think we will see more out of everything we do when you have actual intelligence, alignment, and football structure behind it to support it. And when there are problems, they will be addressed and they will be solved. That's how I feel.
You can't underestimate the importance of players like Sancho Martinez, Bobby Mainu, Luke Shaw. They're so transformative for United that they're going to make them look completely different than anything we've seen on pre-season. Something that we've talked about before, I was reading a thing from Luis Saha the other day, Action United player, talking about how essentially the hybrid inverted winger started with Cristiano Ronaldo, right? And that's, if you look at the cup final when United left out Haaland, they were better. Now, this is not a criticism of Rasmus Haaland. It's a criticism of the modern game of trying to get central strikers into your team. So we're waiting and considering that your wingers are narrow. And I think that losing Haaland, whilst obviously not desirable and you'd prefer to have him, might not have as much of an impact on this game because I'm not even sure he would have started anyway. Because I still think that Ten Hag will look at how they played in the cup final. I don't think City will play any different. And see that this is something, if we repeat how we played in the cup final, we can win this game of football. I think that false nine with not having a striker, was a bit of an issue for City. And the way City played really high with the speed of Garnacho and Rashford down the wings caused them problems.
We did that back all the way back to Ollie beating City with Martial in that role, and it worked every time. It was one of the blueprints for beating them. They struggle with that.
James, I meant seeing at the Etihad that Kyle Walker should have been sent off whenever Rashford was straight through, and that is a massive decision in the outcome of that game. They undoubtedly, they've played United off the park numerous times. I also think they got very lucky at Old Trafford with a penalty that never should have been given, and we never saw it given again. When Paul Tierney gave the penalty on Rodri off Haaland, and I've probably seen that same thing repeated 1,000 times since then and not given. I think that they got lucky in certain aspects, and whatever you want to say, Ten Hag United in the cup final were exceptional, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they shut City down in a way that I Real Madrid didn't do. So you have to give credit where it's due, and that was we talked about Amrabat. We talked Lissandro Martinez was a big part of that, and I think that Diallo, is obviously very important
Yep.
as a fullback too. So I think it'll be all right. I think that Onana had a decent tour. He pulled off some really, really, really good saves. So I
Yeah.
expect that we'll see a better Onana this season. Lastly, I want to ask you about the stadium because Jim Ratcliffe talked about the fact that looking building 100,000 seater stadium. It's most likely the right thing to do. Sentimentally, you'd love to keep Old Trafford, but it doesn't look like that is financially feasible, and structurally feasible either, considering some of the things that are an impediment to that. Raises the question about naming rights. Undoubtedly, if the Glazers had a sold naming rights to a sponsor, there would have been uproar. And some people might say, well, if you're okay with Ineos doing it, you'd be a hypocrite. To me, the difference is what they do with that money. If they take that money and invest it 100% back in the football club, then I would be okay with it. People feel differently, but I think if it's a Snapdragon Stadium at Old Trafford and it brings in a few hundred million, we have to look at the practicalities of it.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's like there's some talk still about potentially, scaling Old Trafford down to play for the youth in the academy. I think there was one story today on that. And I think in an ideal world, they would still consider doing that if it became possible or financially viable. And then you keep the history and you have a new stadium. But in terms of the naming rights, it's like when everybody does it, obviously. I think it was certainly, being in the US, United have visited some of the newest, most modern and best stadiums in the world right now. Like SoFi in Los Angeles, as well as last year, the Allegiant in Las Vegas. These are some of the newest, biggest, best. You have to do it. I mean, you have to do what it takes to get that done to compete, and that's always the balance of it. If you want to stay ahead in the modern game, then you've got to be able to be competitive, and the top clubs are all doing it. I mean, Arsenal moved, right, their stadium from a lot of history, and obviously United is probably the most historic that you'd have there, but still everybody kind of does it, and it's going to divide, but I think for the most part it's probably something that'll happen, and if it's done in a tasteful way, like Old Trafford powered by Snapdragon, I don't think anybody's going to mind it. In the end, it's not like it's going to change what people call it. They're always going to call it the same name. They're always going to see it the same way. It's not going to change the sponsors being on the side of the place, and in the stadium and displayed how they're displayed or on the front of the shirt and all that. It's not going to change anything in the real world, but it will make it better for United and help to make these kind of things plausible. And I think you can be sensitive to it, but understand that it's probably the right decision to do something like this and to take United forward.
I just hope it's not something like, PS Bank or something like that. I don't
I
want
know
it
what
to
you
be,
mean. Like,
I don't want to be named after a bank or something like that. Like, to
yeah,
me, especially if it's someone that's been taking millions in interest payments and stuff like that, but just, yeah. I mean,
yeah, I
there's
know. I
certain
hear you.
things
It's like yeah.
that I mean, I'm okay with a lot of, I recognize this is the world we live in, but there's just certain things that I really hope United have, some standards of what they will not. I will
Yeah,
not.
I hear you.
But anyway, thanks to all of you for downloading the podcast. As always, thanks for all your retweets, likes, follows, and everything else. James, he still hasn't got around to putting his timestamps on that. So whenever he feels like he's up to the task
It'll be
of work
sure,
overtime and
sure,
put his
soon. Yeah,
timestamps, and
yeah.
we shall have them. I eagerly await your eagerly await your endeavors here, and get run out of excuses, Jamesy, as to why we don't have them right now. When James gets you timestamps, I will get you subtitles. How's that?
Yeah, there you go. Sounds good to me. Good
All
deal.
right, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As always, much appreciated. We'll be back our usual time next week on Monday, and hopefully we're talking about a United win in the Community Shield. Take it easy. All the best, Matt.
See you later. Bye.
Cheers, folks. Bye.